Sometimes, all it takes is one person who believes in you, for you to change your entire life. Unknown author. You know, few people ever called Eleanor Vance their favorite teacher. She wasn't the type. She didn't crack jokes during breaks to win over the class. She didn't pretend not to notice cheat sheets during tests. And she certainly never allowed anyone, not even the most hardened seniors, to address her informally. This distance was her principle, her way of preserving dignity, her own and that of her subject. But she was remembered. Oh, how she was remembered. They remembered how her shoes moved silently down the hallway long before the first bell. How she always arrived first, as if synchronizing her watch with the school itself. They remembered her invariably straight back, not out of pride, but from a kind of inner composure. They remembered how she knew how to listen. Never interrupted, even if a student was talking utter nonsense or being insolent, glaring defiantly. She would simply wait for them to run out of steam, and then look at them in a way that made you uneasy. And they also remembered her words, spoken quietly, almost without emphasis, but with such weight that they settled somewhere deep inside. Even if you never open another book in your life, she would say, scanning the class with her serious, attentive eyes, at least learn to respect the word, spoken, written, your own. She taught literature, quietly, confidently, without dramatic hand-wringing or showy emotions. But in her voice, in her demeanor, there was that inner strength that doesn't need shouting to be heard. Usually people like her don't become heroes of loud stories. They just work, day after day, year after year, class after class. They give of themselves quietly, unnoticed, until the school forgets their faces and the grown children forget their names. But for some reason, Eleanor Vance was hard to forget. Not because of her appearance, an ordinary middle-aged woman with weariness in the corners of her eyes and fine threads of gray in her neatly gathered hair. Not because of her teaching methods. She was strict rather than lenient, demanding, unforgiving of carelessness. She was remembered because she saw what others stubbornly ignored. Behind the bully's mask, a lost boy. Behind the insolence, a desperate bid for attention. Behind the silence, a cry for help. And when someone pulled another stunt, she didn't rush to call parents or threaten them with the principal. She just looked them in the eye, for a long time, attentively, without judgment, but with a kind of deep question. And the troublemaker, the toughest one, couldn't withstand that gaze, would lower his eyes. He himself would feel ashamed. "I know you can do better," she would say quietly after this silent duel. "I see it. Sometimes, believe it or not, it worked better than any punishment." Her personal life was a quiet harbor, long run shallow. She had no husband, or rather, he was gone, many, many years ago. A terrible accident, an instant that erased everything. Sons, none either. There had been one, a tiny bundle of joy, but he faded so quickly, in infancy, leaving behind an unhealing wound in her heart. Her parents passed away, one after the other. Friends got lost along life's road. Everyone had their own families, their own worries. Her world shrank to simple, repetitive things. The school, smelling of chalk and youth. A small studio apartment on the edge of town, where time seemed frozen. The local library, where she went for books and quiet. And 3 modest violets on the windowsill, her silent companions. Her salary, like all teachers, barely enough to get by. Savings, next to none. Sometimes, towards the end of the month, when her wallet was completely empty, she would go to the store, clutching a note she had written to herself in her pocket. Today, only bread and tea, and not a crumb more. But no one ever heard her complain. She didn't ask for help, didn't seek sympathy. She thought to herself, thousands, millions live like this. So, it's normal. So, it can be endured. Every morning began the same. Up at 6:30 before dawn. Breakfast, the unchanging oatmeal made with water and a cup of strong black tea without sugar. On the kitchen table, next to the cooling oatmeal, a stack of notebooks, a red pen, and the day's lesson schedule already waited. Routine had become her salvation. She didn't live for high marks in the grade book, not for certificates from the district office, and certainly not for gratitude from students or their parents. She had long understood that was a rare and non-essential bonus. She simply knew someone had to stay. Someone had to be that one adult who wouldn't brush them off, wouldn't be afraid of a difficult teenager with a prickly gaze and clenched fists. The one who, when everyone around said, "Nothing good will come of him, he's a lost cause," would quietly but firmly reply, "But I'll try anyway, one more time." And so that year, in the fall, he arrived in her 7th grade class, a new student, transferred from a school across town. It was immediately clear: trouble. He trailed a history of fights, disrespect towards teachers, skipping school, and reprimands. At the new school, they quickly nicknamed him Shadow, because he seemed to try to be invisible, spoke to no one, didn't make eye contact, answered teachers monosyllabically, or remained silent, staring at his desk. A shadow that glided through the school hallways, noticing no one, and noticed by no one. Teachers in the faculty lounge just shook their heads, filed him under hopeless. One of her colleagues, a veteran teacher with years of service, snapped irritably, "That kid's heading straight for jail. I've seen his type before, I know." A heavy sigh hung in the air. But Eleanor Vance, she said nothing, didn't argue. Just silently opened her gradebook, found his name, Michael Rodriguez, and placed a small, almost invisible pencil dot next to it, her own, personal. It was how she always marked those she decided to take on seriously. Those in whom she saw not just a problem, but something else. A spark, pain, potential. Because even the darkest shadows, she whispered to herself, closing the book, are sometimes cast by a very bright light. She didn't know then, of course, couldn't have known, that this sullen, prickly boy would one day simply disappear from school, as if he'd never been there. That his life would tread the very edge, a knife's blade, and that many, many years later, when she herself would be on the brink of despair, when darkness began to gather in her own life, it would be him, this shadow, who would be the only one to step forward from the past, a step to save her. His name was Mike. The last name was Rodriguez, but no one in class called him that. They tried not to call him anything, avoided him, as if afraid of getting dirty or running into trouble. He appeared in mid-September, silent, slouching, always in a black hoodie, the hood pulled low over his eyes, and his eyes, dull, indifferent, like those of an old, weary man. He took the last desk by the window, the spot for outcasts and troublemakers, hunched over, almost pressed his forehead to the scratched desktop. Not a word, only his shoulders were tense, coiled like a boxer before a punch, as if expecting an attack at any moment. And the first thing she saw in him, through this armor of alienation, was not defiance, not malice, but a deep, all-consuming weariness, as if he carried an unbearable weight on his thin shoulders. During his very first literature class, he was blatantly asleep, head down on his arms. The class snickered. Any other teacher probably would have kicked him out immediately. But Eleanor Vance didn't raise her voice. She simply walked over to his desk and said quietly, almost in his ear, "Mike, You can certainly sleep at home. This is literature class after all. But if things are really tough for you right now, just tell me. We'll figure something out." He didn't answer, didn't even lift his head, just shrugged irritably. After the bell, he silently gathered his things and left the classroom, looking at no one. A week later, the first fight. Right in the hallway, during break. Some kid from another class carelessly threw an insult after him about being a jailbird's kid. Mike didn't let it slide, reacted instantly, furiously. A meeting with the principal. His mother was called. She didn't come. Her phone was off. His homeroom teacher just threw up his hands. What could you do? Eleanor Vance was called into the principal's office, just as another adult, as the teacher of the 7th grade class where this new kid was enrolled. She entered and saw Mike. He was sitting on a chair in front of the principal's desk, with a split lip, a fresh scratch on his eyebrow, and fists clenched tightly. His gaze, wolfish, defiant from under his brow. The principal asked him questions, but Mike was silent. Then Eleanor Vance stepped forward. "Mike, do you realize you could have easily broken his jaw? Do you understand that?" He looked up at her. Something like defiance flashed in his eyes. "He started it. He insulted me." "Yes, he started it, and you continued it, and you were stronger. Responsibility always lies with the stronger one." He stared at her for several seconds, and then suddenly asked, quietly, but bitterly, "You think I'm just trash too? Like everyone else?" She held his gaze, looked him straight in the eye. "No, Mike. I think you were very scared. Because when no one loves a person for a long time, really doesn't love them, they start defending themselves against the whole world, even if no one is attacking, just in case." He blinked. Once, twice, as if she had struck a very raw, hidden nerve, as if for the first time in his life, someone had put into words what he felt but couldn't express. From that day on, a strange, unspoken agreement formed between them. A silent truce. He stopped being openly rude to her in class. She stopped reprimanding him in front of everyone, preferring to speak with him privately. Sometimes he stayed after school, not because he wanted to help or chat, but simply because it seemed he had nowhere else to go. Home held no appeal. "If you want, help erase the board," she'd say casually, grading papers. "Or arrange these books on the shelf alphabetically." He would nod silently, and do it. Reluctantly, but neatly. In those moments of silence in the empty classroom, something intangible hung between them, understanding without words. One day, as he was silently arranging books like this, she came over and placed a thick, worn volume on the desk in front of him. Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment. He looked at the book, then at her, as if she'd asked him to lift an impossibly heavy brick. That's really hard to read," he mumbled. "Give it a try," she replied calmly. "You can handle it. I think you're up to it." He didn't write the required essay on the novel. Got another F. But a week later, after class, he approached her desk on his own. He hesitated a bit, then said quietly, looking away, "I never really understood why Raskolnikov killed that old woman, but I think I get why he broke down afterward. You can't run away from yourself." She looked up at him from her papers, and smiled. It seemed like the first time all school year she had given him a real, warm smile. "Then you understood the most important thing, Mike. The most important thing." The class continued to snicker at him, at his silence, at his awkward mistakes on quizzes. But now he had a defender. Her. "While you're busy giggling," she'd say sternly, surveying the laughing students, "he's at least trying to understand something important. Many of you haven't even started thinking. Mike never said thank you to her, not once. But one day, staying after class again, he silently held out a small paper bag of cheap, hard candies. My mom got paid yesterday, bought these, said to give them to the literature teacher. She took the bag. The candies were sticky. Thank you, Mike, but why did you pass them on? You could have kept them. He shrugged, avoiding her eyes again. Because, well, you're different somehow, not like everyone else. She knew. He was still balancing on the edge. Outbursts during breaks, new bad grades in other subjects, a difficult home situation with an eternally exhausted, frazzled mother, and a father about whom there were vague rumors involving prison. But he held on, clung. Maybe because he now knew there was at least one person in this world who believed in him, who had put that pencil dot next to his name in her gradebook. And sometimes, you know, that's enough. It's more important than 100 lectures and punishments. Mike disappeared in the spring. Not exactly suddenly, his departure had been building gradually. First, he stopped turning in homework, then started skipping individual classes, then missed several days of school at a time, and then he just didn't come back at all. The class barely noticed. One less problem kid, so what? Some teachers, frankly, breathed a sigh of relief. But Eleanor Vance, she wasn't surprised. It was as if she'd been expecting it, as if she understood that the thin thread he was holding onto was about to snap. She called his mother, got through on the third or fourth try. The voice on the line was unfamiliar, harsh. "We left," the woman said curtly. "Moved to another city. My husband found work." She didn't answer Eleanor's questions, said goodbye, and hung up. She never saw Mike again. But for a long time afterward, entering the empty classroom after school, or walking down the echoing hallway, she would catch herself involuntarily scanning for a familiar slouching figure in a black hoodie, waiting for him by her classroom door. Imagining that somewhere in a hidden corner of the schoolyard, a lighter would click, and he would reappear from the shadows, as always. But he never appeared. Years passed. The school hardly changed. The same walls, the same desks, the same smell. But the students, they changed. New ones arrived, older ones left. She continued to teach, grade papers, talk after class, listen about first loves, fights with parents, fears about the future. But her strength dwindled with each passing year, and money even more so. Her aging apartment in the old block, her quiet harbor, began to openly fall apart. The kitchen ceiling showed yellow water stains after Ocherdnoa Dojdia. The faucet in the bathroom dripped monotonously, counting out the seconds of loneliness. The water and electricity meters were faulty, showing unthinkable numbers. Her school salary had long stagnated, while prices in the stores rose relentlessly. Getting a new coat or boots became an unaffordable luxury. Medications, only the most essential from a list. Groceries, increasingly bought on sale, discounted. She still complained to no one, considered it weakness, improper. But one cold January evening, the lights went out in her apartment. A breaker tripped in the hallway, and darkness, for non-payment. But it must be a mistake, she said bewilderedly into the phone to the dispatcher. I paid last month. I have the receipt. Yes, you paid, came the indifferent reply. But not everything. You have an outstanding balance, $286.30, $286.30. Until it's paid, we won't turn it back on. She silently lowered the receiver, sat on a chair in the dark kitchen, wrapped herself tighter in an old woolen cardigan, took a small flashlight from a drawer, felt for the stack of ungraded papers on the table. She graded them late into the night by the dim beam of the flashlight. The red pen scratched across the pages, correcting errors, assigning grades. And then she just sat and stared out the dark window. Winter was out there. High snowdrifts under the streetlights, the dead silence of the sleeping city. And suddenly she saw below, on the snow-covered path, a lone female figure, shuffling slowly somewhere. And it seemed that figure looked incredibly like herself. In the spring, her elderly neighbor from down the hall passed away, alone, just like her. Left behind only a cat, a skittish ginger creature. Relatives refused to take the cat. Eleanor Vance, after hesitating, took it in. "Well now," she told the cat, when it finally emerged from under the sofa, "you'll be my friend now. Shall we read Pushkin together in the evenings?" The cat, it seemed, didn't object, now purred on her lap when she read aloud. Then, in the summer, more news came from the school. Position cuts, optimization. Her teaching hours were cut almost in half. "Eleanor, you understand. The younger generation is moving up," the department head said with an apologetic smile. "Competition, new requirements. Nothing personal, you're an experienced teacher, you understand." She nodded. "Yes, of course, nothing unexpected. I understand." One evening, sorting through old papers in a closet, she came across a worn cardboard folder. Inside were yellowed student essays, a few letters from former graduates, old thank you notes from parents. And among them, a sheet torn from a graph paper notebook. Large, uneven, almost childlike handwriting. "Mrs. Vance, thank you for everything, for not kicking me out then, for believing in me. If I ever make something of myself in life, I'll definitely come back and repay you." There was no signature, just one letter at the end. M. She clutched the yellowed sheet in her hand, closed her eyes for a moment, and for the first time in a long while, a faint, slightly bitter smile appeared on her face. "Who would even remember you now, Mike?" she whispered into the silence of the empty apartment. "So many years have passed." She didn't know, had absolutely no idea that very soon someone would indeed knock on her door, loudly and insistently, and a familiar yet matured voice would say, "Mrs. Vance, it's me, Mike. You saved me back then. Now, it's my turn." It was a completely ordinary day. Ordinary in the sense that Eleanor Vance no longer expected anything good from it. Her retirement check was late. The cat, playing, knocked her favorite cup off the table, the last one from an old set. The internet had been cut off the previous week for non-payment, and in the mailbox that morning, she found another stern notice from the power company stamped, "Marked for disconnection. Pay debt immediately." The amount was relatively small, but for her now, insurmountable. She sat on a stool by the kitchen window, looked out at the street. A fine, cold spring rain was falling. Drops rolled slowly down the dirty glass, as if weeping with her, or for her. The apartment was quiet, except for the steady drip of the faucet in the bathroom. She hadn't managed to get it fixed, and there was no money for a plumber anyway. And suddenly, a sharp, insistent ring at the door. She startled at the unexpected sound. Who could it be? Almost no one visited her. The mail carrier left notices in the mailbox downstairs. Neighbors greeted her on the stairs but didn't drop by. Students hadn't come by in a long time. Slowly, rising with difficulty, she went to the door. Looked through the peephole. Saw no one. They must have been standing too close. Hesitantly, she turned the key and opened the door a crack. On the threshold stood a tall, unfamiliar man, in an expensive dark coat under which a sharp suit was visible. He was silent and just looked at her, intently, attentively, and something elusively familiar was in that gaze. in those eyes, something from the very distant past. "Hello," he finally said. His voice was low, calm. "Good day," she replied, bewildered. Are you looking for me?" "Yes, for you. You are Mrs. Vance, aren't you?" She nodded silently, still trying to figure out who this was. "My name is Michael Rodriguez. I was in your class, 7th grade. You probably don't remember me. I kind of, well, disappeared suddenly back then. We moved away." She was silent for several long seconds. Then she squinted, peering at his face, at those eyes, the back desk, the black hoodie, Crime and Punishment, the essay on a scrap of newspaper, the pencil dot in the gradebook. "Crime and Punishment," she murmured. "Last desk by the window. And the essay. You wrote it on a piece of newspaper scrap. I remember." "Yes," he smiled. A completely different smile than back then. Open, warm. "That was me." She didn't know what to say. Emotions overwhelmed her. Surprise, confusion, something else she couldn't name. She simply stepped aside silently, letting him into the cramped entryway. "Come in, since you're here." They sat in the kitchen. She poured him tea, the only thing she could offer. Without sugar, she was out. He sat at the table so simply, so naturally, as if the 10 or 15 years of separation hadn't existed. "You've changed, Mrs. Vance," he said, looking at her. "But your eyes are still the same, very observant. And you've grown up," she replied quietly, studying him. "Grown up a lot, and become a real man. A good one. It shows immediately." He glanced away slightly, as if embarrassed. "Thanks to you, in many ways. Back then, you were the only one who saw anything in me. Besides the bad stuff, everyone else had already written me off. But you put that pencil dot there. I remember." She smiled faintly, just with her lips. "I always put a dot where I feel not everything has been said yet, that the story isn't over." He paused for a moment, then took a white business envelope from his inner coat pocket and placed it on the table in front of her. "Here. This is the first thing. I did some checking. Anyway, the receipts are in there. All your debts are paid. Electricity, rent, everything outstanding." "Mike, what are you doing?" she exclaimed, pushing the envelope away. "Why did you do this? I didn't ask. I feel awkward." "Mrs. Vance, I'm not offering you charity. I'm repaying a debt. My debt." "But what debt? Why?" He looked at her directly, firmly. His gaze held no trace of that cornered boy from years ago. "You didn't walk past me back then, even though you could have, and had every right to. Now, it's my turn not to walk past. That's all." He didn't leave right away that evening. Stayed to drink the cooling tea, helped her wash the dishes. Then he noticed a sparking outlet in the kitchen, got some tools from his car, and silently fixed it. The same outlet that hadn't worked for 2 years. Before leaving, he said, "I'm around now, Mrs. Vance. If you need anything, call me. Anytime. I'll come. And I'm not here as your former student anymore. Just as a person. If you'll let me, I'd like to help." She didn't answer him right away. Tears welled up in her throat, and she was afraid her voice would break. She just looked at him, at this grown, self-assured man, in whom she could still glimpse traces of that difficult teenager. Then she said softly, "You know, Mike, you didn't just come to pay debts. You came, like family, like you never left." He nodded, seriously, without smiling. "That's right, Mrs. Vance. That's right. From that day on, Eleanor Vance's life changed. Mike really did start coming by. Every week, sometimes more often. Without calls or warnings. Just letting himself in with his key. She herself had given him a spare set a couple of weeks after their first meeting. He brought bags full of groceries, not just bread and tea, but fruit, cheese, good butter, things she had long forgotten. Silently paid all the bills he found in the mailbox. Once a month, he brought a doctor he knew to check her blood pressure, listen to her heart, prescribe necessary medications, which he immediately bought at the pharmacy. Then one day he arrived looking particularly serious and said, "Mrs. Vance, I've spoken to some people. Basically, quit your job at the school. Enough is enough. I've arranged everything. You'll receive a good personal pension from a foundation that well, it doesn't matter. You don't need to work yourself to the bone for pennies anymore." At first, she protested, almost yelled at him. "Have you lost your mind, Mike? What will I do? I'm used to working. I can't just sit around." "And you won't have to sit around," he replied calmly. "You'll simply be able to live, instead of just surviving. Feel the difference." And he truly did open up that difference for her. Real life. He hired a crew, and they renovated her old apartment, put up bright wallpaper, fixed the plumbing, replaced the creaky floors. A new washing machine appeared, a microwave, even a new electric kettle, the kind that whistles cheerfully when it boils. She listened to that whistle and laughed like a girl. "My goodness, Mike, how many years has it been since I heard that simple sound? A whistling kettle? An eternity." Sometimes in the evenings, he read aloud to her. Good books he brought himself. He read quietly and expressively, just as she once had to her students. And she, in return, would get out her old folder and read him letters from former students. Different kinds of letters. Some were written in clumsy handwriting from prison. Others came from across the country, or even abroad. "Mrs. Vance, thank you. You were the first one who wasn't afraid of me back then. You know, thanks to you, I became a literature teacher myself. I still keep that notebook with the A you gave me for the War and Peace essay." He listened attentively, nodding. Then he said, "See? And you thought you were living for nothing, that nobody needed you." She truly blossomed, began to talk more, smile more. She moved around the apartment more slowly now. The years were taking their toll. But now there was a new confidence in her step. Even the cat, her ginger friend, stopped hiding under the sofa when Mike came and rubbed against his legs. "You know, Mike," she told him one quiet autumn evening as they drank tea in the renovated kitchen, "I always thought I'd die alone, like this, in this apartment, in the dark. No calls, no visitors, all alone. But now I don't even feel like dying anymore. Not at all." He smiled his warm, calm smile. "Don't you even think about it, Mrs. Vance. Don't even consider it. Besides, I still haven't really learned how to water your violets properly." Then one time, he came with a new proposal. "Mrs. Vance, how about a drive out of town with me on Saturday? Come take a look. My partners and I are opening a small center, sort of a place for troubled teens, the ones everyone else has given up on. We could really use your advice there. Not as an employee, no. But as someone who knows how to believe in those nobody believes in anymore. You're a real master at that. Top tier." She gazed out the window for a long time, at the yellowing trees. Then she looked back at him, and said quietly, "You really did become who you were meant to be, Mike. Even better. Much better." He just shrugged. "I just happened to cross your path at the right time, Mrs. Vance. Or you crossed mine." That evening, after Mike left, she took that same old notebook with her student notes from the closet. Found the page with the name Rodriguez. The pencil dot, put there so many years ago, was now carefully circled in pen. And beneath it, a new entry appeared, written in her changed, slightly trembling but still firm handwriting. Saved. Now saving others. It means none of it was in vain. The autumn that year was unusually beautiful, warm, golden. The leaves on the trees, like pages from a book with watercolor illustrations. The air, clear, crisp, smelling of damp leaves and the last warmth. Eleanor Vance sat on a bench near her apartment entrance, wrapped in a warm blanket, a thermos of hot tea beside her, the cat in a cozy carrier. A little way off, talking on his phone about important business, stood Mike. No longer the outcast boy, not the difficult student, a respectable man, with an expensive watch, important calls, a busy schedule. But he always found time for her. "You know, Mike," she said, when he finished his call and came over, looking at the fiery maples across the way. "I never got to be a grandmother in my life. It wasn't meant to be. But sitting here now, I feel like I have become one, like you're my grandson." He didn't reply, just sat down silently beside her and gently placed his large, warm hand over her thin one in its old glove. "You're my person, Mrs. Vance," he said quietly. "My most important person, and that's not a title, not a profession. It's probably fate." Now, in her kitchen, in a prominent place, hung a framed photograph, or rather, two photos side by side. One showed him, a sullen 14-year-old teenager in a black hoodie, glaring defiantly, and the other, the same him, but now. A successful, confident man in a business suit, with an open smile, and beneath the photos, an inscription in his handwriting: "Someone truly believed in you once, and you were able to rise up. Now, it's your turn to believe in others." She was needed again. Not because she wrote reports or graded papers, but because she was the person who knew how to see the light even in the deepest shadow. The one who hadn't walked past. The one who saved. And the one who, in the end, was also saved. Simply because someone had once repaid their most important debt, the debt of humanity.